Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Burlington County and the Division of Criminal Justice listening session. Before we get started, I would like to run over a few housekeeping items so you all know how to participate in tonight's event. First, all lines are on mute. If you have a question, you will have the opportunity to text them into today's presenters. Please type your questions, comments, and/or your thoughts into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send them in at any time during this presentation, and we will collect them and address them throughout the session. Similar questions will be combined, and inappropriate or offensive questions will not be announced. Due to time constraints, please keep all questions on topic. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties at any point during our presentation, please explain your problem through the chat feature and we will try our best to address the issue. Lastly, we are recording this listening session and the video will be available on the Burlington County Prosecutor's Facebook page and the Police Department's homepages within 24 hours. Please subscribe to the New Jersey OAG on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Flickr for the latest updates on information, resources, and news from our office and other offices throughout the state. Now, I'd like to hand things over to our host and our moderator, Burlington County Prosecutor Scott Copina.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was muted there. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I apologize for the technical difficulties in getting started, but appreciate the fantastic turnout that we have. As a society, we are still struggling to come to terms with the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in Minneapolis. Emotions are still so raw, it is hard to see past the anger and frustration that is killing released in our country. But if we are to get from where we are to where we need to be, we need to talk about it. So we really appreciate this opportunity to have an open dialogue between law enforcement and the communities we. The importance of this conversation seems obvious to me. As county prosecutor, I have had the privilege of working with many of the men and women of our local police departments, including riding with them on patrol. In many cases, they are serving in the town they grew up in, and all I have ever detected is a genuine desire to come to work each day to help others. I have seen them treat people they have stopped in a car, people they have arrested, people who are facing addiction, and crime victims with respect. I have received very few complaints about improper use of force by the police or of any abusive behavior during my 3+ years as prosecutor. But my direct number is in case anyone wants to make such a complaint.
Oh my.
609-265-5034. I want everybody to know that they reach out to directly if they have a complaint. And our office's email account is prosecutor@co.burlington.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're having some technical difficulties, and so in the business we call this an audible. Prosecutor, perhaps if you go over to Joe's computer.
Oh my God.
And Holly, you're live.
Am I back?
You are back.
I'm back in a different venue. Okay. So, as I was saying, no one should ever have to fear for the safety of a loved one if they encounter a police officer. If we can accomplish anything tonight, it would be to start to understand the disconnect between law enforcement officers who believe they are well-intentioned and those members of our broad, diverse community who have a different experience or perception of the police. My friend Marcus Sibley of the NAACP had a great suggestion to include not just chiefs, but patrol officers in this community conversation. Marcus was 100% right. And so I've asked police chiefs throughout the county to have members of their patrol units sign on to this conversation. Those participating in tonight's discussion have the ear not only of multiple chiefs of police, but of many patrol officers whom they interact with more directly and more often. We all want to hear your experiences with the police, positive and negative, your concerns, your experiences, what community outreach you think is effective, and your suggestions for how we can build more trust. We're prepared to leave here tonight with homework so we can meet our common goal of police-community relations built on mutual trust and respect and equal justice for all. We are honored to be joined this evening by Congressman Andy Kim and State Senator Troy Singleton, both of whom have been very visible in the community and also very active in their respective legislative efforts to seek better justice for all. The Congressman and Senator have been able to carve out some time out of their packed schedules to join us, so I will turn it over to them for opening remarks. If anyone submits questions for either of them after they have to drop off, we will pass them along. Congressman Kim, we'll start with you, sir. Take the camera off and mute me.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining and coming together here. So, Prosecutor Kafina, thank you so much for helping pull this together. And I know a little bit of technical difficulties. We probably have too many people in this country trying to use Netflix at the same time or something like that. But we'll power through that and be able to have the kind of dialogue that our community needs and deserves. So, thank you so much for convening all of us here today. Today is a very important opportunity for us to come together. It is made all the more difficult by the fact that we are during a middle of a pandemic. Socially distancing has made it difficult for us to have some of these types of conversations that are necessary for us to move forward. I've certainly been doing everything that I can to try to hear from all aspects of our community to try to think about what comes next. And what we know is that no single level or part of our government or our community or our society will be able to solve this problem on their own. We at the federal level are trying to take actions to be able to think through strategically what is necessary to be able to have the change in the full form that is needed. But for me to be able to be a voice for this community and a representative of this in that discussions down in Congress, it's important for me to hear from all of you, from every side, and for us to have that and hash that out as I've been trying to do, and I'm grateful to this forum today. I know Senator Singleton is very much in the same place, the prosecutor, our law enforcement, and others that are joining us together today. So I'm really grateful for that. I really want to hear from all of you, so I will not take up any more time, but just to lend again my strong support for this type of dialogue. And I stand ready to join in any other efforts and to be able to continue this. I hope this is just an opening for us to continue this and do this much more and make sure that we can have this productive going forward. So again, thank you so much, prosecutor and everyone, for allowing me to be able to come and say a few words, and look forward to hearing the conversation, the dialogue ahead. Thank you so much.
Okay, Senator Singleton, you're up, sir. Now he's. Oh my God. This is an absolute fiasco.
Senator Singleton, we cannot hear you. You may just want to check to make sure that your computer is not muted. And Scott, you have a live link.
Okay, well, I guess Senator Singleton's having his share of technical difficulties as well. So hopefully he'll be able to get that straightened out, and we'll get him back in a minute. I want to note that the Attorney General is in the process of updating his use of force policy for law enforcement, which was last updated in 2000. He is soliciting input from the public, and everyone in this meeting can submit any comments or suggestions for the policy at a comment portal, which is front and center on the AG's website, which is nj.gov/OAG. So I wanted to note that. And then I also want to say that we have an outstanding panel tonight, as long as we can get past the tech, that represents 5 different police departments from our county and the Attorney General's office. Our thank you to Chief Brian Pesch from Bordentown Township Police Department, Chief John Fine from City of Burlington Police Department, Willingboro Police Safety Director Kanama Lohman, Burlington Township Police Officer Jared Broadway, and Evesham Township Police Officer Joshua Weiss, and finally Deputy Director of Criminal Justice Rob Sepio. You know, tonight our goal is to hear from and respond to members of the communities we serve. So we're going light on presentations from our panel. We're even going to pass on our panelists' bios and refer you to our Facebook page for them. However, since this is a discussion of police reform, use of force, and interactions between law enforcement and the public, some discussion of the training that New Jersey's police officers already received might be helpful to frame the conversation. New Jersey police officers are among the best trained and most closely supervised in the country when it comes to things like use of force. We're going to start with Rob Sepio, who leads our statewide use of force training program and who has a gift of being able to distill a 2-hour presentation into an easily understandable 5 minutes. So we'll ask him to give us an overview of some of the training our officers receive, especially in those areas that are most on our minds right now. Rob?
Thank you, Scott. And Scott, if you want to take a few minutes just to discuss some of your things you wanted to discuss, it was a little fuzzy. If you need to break in, feel free. And if the senator's ready, if you need to break in, feel free as well, okay?
Thank you. We'll just turn it over to you, though.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rob Sepio. I'm a Deputy Director with the Division of Criminal Justice. I wear many hats, but the hat I'm going to talk to you tonight about is the training hat that we do at the Division of Criminal Justice. The best kept secret is that New Jersey law enforcement leads the nation in all these trainings. Whether we're talking about cultural diversity, whether we're talking about de-escalation, whether we're talking about use of force, whether we're talking about law enforcement and their interaction with the Black community or the LGBT community or the transgender community or the Sikh community or the Muslim community or the Jewish Orthodox community or the Asian community or the Latin, Latino, Hispanic community. We have all created trainings, and law enforcement officers take trainings in New Jersey based upon all those subjects. I indicated it's the best kept secret because we don't talk about it much. Law enforcement officers do this on a yearly basis. It's part of their academy training. It's part of their training that they do on as part of the CLEAR Institute that's mandated by the Attorney General's office. Other states come to us wanting to actually see what we're doing in here in New Jersey. I think it's important for the public to understand how proactive this Attorney General, Scott Cofina at the Burlington County Prosecutor's Office has been when it comes to all of these issues. From a use of force perspective, our law enforcement officers are trained twice a year, mandatorily on use of force when they go to the range. That also includes the pursuit policy as well. On de-escalation, starting in 2017, the Division of Criminal Justice, working with our partners and the Attorney General's Office with the Division of Mental Health and Services, created a 6-hour de-escalation course for law enforcement officers dealing with individuals who have special needs. Because depending on the special need, how to de-escalate that individual will be different. And so all law enforcement officers were required to take that in 2017. In 2018, we did a 3-hour cultural diversity course dealing with de-escalation as well, with law enforcement interaction with multiple different cultures and religions, and how to de-escalate. We continue to push out trainings. For example, on Monday, we did a pilot on the law enforcement in the Black community, which is timely. And to understand the Black community, you need to understand history. And most law enforcement officers don't understand the history and what's driving perception. And so to de-escalate, to have a conversation, you need to understand their lens. And we've been heavy on that for the past several years. And all law enforcement officers, all of these trainings in law enforcement are there. We do a lot of training on bias and prosecution of bias crimes, reporting of bias crimes, a lot of outreach with all of our communities dealing with needing them to report bias crimes. We've done a lot of trainings on implicit bias for police officers, as well as, and I believe we're the first in the nation on this, all assistant prosecutors and criminal deputies attorneys general on implicit bias training, unique trainings on those issues and implicit bias. And I know Prosecutor Cofina recently announced something that's going on in Burlington County that I believe we're going to be talking about later today. We've also been talking about excellence in policing, and this was a package of reforms. Even though we've been leading the nation, we simply don't stop. If we can make it better, if we can tweak it, we can. And so last December, the Attorney General announced 7 separate directives dealing with excellence in policing, from internal affairs investigations all the way through for transparency purposes and promoting transparency, promoting investigations and ensuring that the high quality that we demand of law enforcement is met. And if in fact interactions with the community, we do not meet that high standard, that there is a review. From early intervention systems and early warning systems to track if it's a training issue for an officer. We've heavily invested in that. And as a matter of fact, we're not satisfied. We're taking a look at that and seeing how we could tweak it to make it better. And also in New Jersey, we also understand that in order to understand the law enforcement officer and from the law enforcement perspective, we also need to look at the officer themselves, that the officer is in the right frame of mind, because this job is very, very stressful. The things that law enforcement officers see on a daily basis, the human mind isn't meant to see sometimes. They respond to motor vehicle accidents or homicides. And as a result of the events that officers see and the stresses that they're under, not even talking about COVID-19, pre-COVID-19, but especially during COVID-19, the stresses are extremely high. And so we have the New Jersey Resiliency Program, which again, Burlington County has been a partner in a lot of these partnerships, most of these trainings that we do. But on this one, actually, we followed Burlington County's lead on this. And we created the New Jersey Resiliency Program for law enforcement officers, for the officers themselves, that they can actually talk to someone. And we have a 2-day training that all law enforcement officers are going to be required to take by the end of 2022, which is life-changing and will help their quality of life. So if you look at the broad spectrum, I indicated to you that the best kept secret in New Jersey is that we're leading the nation in everything that we're proactive on. Quite frankly, those in the community, this may be the first time you're hearing this. The reason being is because we simply put our heads down and get to work and work with the law enforcement agencies, our partners, in this case, the Burlington County Prosecutor's offices and community leaders as well, to make sure that our law enforcement protects the community they serve. I do want to thank Scott for putting this together. All the technical issues include the first rule of training is you improvise, and I think the group is going to get a crash course in improvisation. But Scott, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I appreciate that. You mentioned implicit bias training in your presentation, and it gets back to what I was talking about, some of which may have been garbled. So I will make that point about part of the reason that we're here today is because of this disconnect that I'd like a conversation such as the one we're having to bridge between police officers who think they're doing a great job, who are supportive, who are coming out to help the community and believe they're doing so, and certain aspects of our community who just don't see it that way. And when you have two people who see things differently, you have to try to figure out why that is. And I think one of the explanations for that possibly might be implicit bias. And implicit bias are the things that we, it's also called unconscious bias, where we have certain perceptions and assumptions about things that we perceive, positive and negative, and we respond to those in a certain way. And we're not even necessarily thinking about it when we do, but yet the person on the receiving end of it is seeing a different reaction based upon that perception. And that could result in a person of one skin color having a different interaction with a police officer than another one, with the police officer thinking that they're treating both parties completely equally. So teasing out that implicit or unconscious bias, I think, is one way to bridge this divide. And so we're going to bring it to all of our officers in Burlington County. We're working with the vendor that the Division of Criminal Justice worked with to train everybody, the prosecutors, the detectives, and the troopers last year, because we think that that's one tool that will be able to help us bridge this divide. Another tool that we have is crisis intervention training, and we're very fortunate to have Officer Jared Broadway from the Burlington Township Police Department with us today. Jared has trained more than 350 Burlington County officers in this very important training aimed at providing police with the tools to recognize and respond to a person experiencing a mental or emotional crisis. Effective crisis intervention often avoids the need for any use of force by an officer to bring a situation to a safe conclusion. And Jared will spend a few minutes describing this very important tool.
presentation. And let's pull it up. And we're going to talk about CIT. So if you have never heard of CIT, it's a program like the prosecutor just mentioned. CIT is a program aimed at providing law enforcement officers with the training necessary to deal with people with mental illness more effectively. Not saying that we did it wrong throughout the years, but we could have done it better. So it's a 40-hour course taught over 5 days, and it's not just police officers. We have police officers, mental health workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, and all kinds, and community partners that all come together to deliver the material. Everybody has their own piece of the pie that they bring and make the program better. NAMI helps out. Those are the family perspectives. So it's a perspective that maybe officers never even thought about, because we're used to, we go in, we solve the problems, we move on. So by bringing all of these groups together, we can do a better job. Each county program tailors their program to suit the needs of their specific population. CIT International is the parent company of CIT, and they tell us what we should teach as basis. But in Burlington County, we partnered with, and this is in no particular order, Hampton Behavioral Health, NAMI New Jersey, Andrews Federal Credit Union. Most importantly, Burlington County Human Services, where Rachel Morgan is my co-coordinator. She's the coordinator for mental health, I'm the coordinator for law enforcement. Oaks Integrated Care and Legacy Treatment Services. Those are really the core agencies that have come together in Burlington County to ensure that we can deliver quality training, build the program, and just make it better for everybody. So what are the benefits of CIT? One, increased awareness. Increased awareness that there are people out there with mental illness, and yes, people can suffer from mental illness, but it doesn't have to be life altering. They shouldn't be treated differently by the police for their mental illness. And I caution people when we get into it, say, we're not making excuses for criminal behavior, but we're also not going to criminalize their mental illness. Just like we wouldn't arrest somebody for having diabetes or for having high blood pressure or cancer, we're not going to arrest somebody that may be acting out because they have schizophrenia and they're off their medications. If they rob a bank, yes, that's a criminal act. They're going to be dealt with accordingly, but we're not going to criminalize the actual mental illness. We want to acknowledge that, yes, people have differences. People, they may look different, they may act differently, but a lot of times people with mental illness can go on to live productive lives. Most relevant to what we're talking about right now, reduced rates of injuries. And it's not just to the consumers or the persons with lived experience, it's also for the police officers. Use of force by its very nature is inherently ugly and it's dangerous, and sometimes people are injured. So we want to, by de-escalating, by talking through, by slowing down, by figuring out how we can best handle the situation, we reduce the number of times that we have to use force. And finally, reduce liability for the agency, because a better trained officer, better training just results in better performance. Of everything, the most important thing is have a plan. What is the plan? And there's a block that we teach in CIT called When Words Fail. What we talk about is everything that we do in CIT, yes, we hope it works. We de-escalate, we slow down, we listen, we involve the family members, we call in mental health professionals. Sometimes it doesn't work. Like I said, sometimes despite your best efforts, things don't work and you have to go hands-on as a police officer. And you might have to go hands-on after 2 minutes, you might have to go hands-on after 2 hours, but there comes a point when you might have to go hands-on. We want to do it safely, we want to do it effectively, we want to use the least amount of force necessary to accomplish the objective. So part of CIT is having a plan. You can't go in blindly, you can't wing it. And not only do you need a plan, you need a backup plan and a backup to the backup. And we, through role playing, through site visits, through consumer panels, we bring all this together and say, hey, we're going to talk, we're going to try our best to de-escalate, to handle this peacefully. But when it comes to use of force, we want officers to be able to do it safely, do it effectively, make sure that we're not injured, make sure that the consumer's not injured, and have an overall positive outcome. So that is it for the crash course on CIT. We can answer more questions, but I really want to give you the opportunity to ask your questions, because that's what we're here. We are here to listen to you.
That's right, and thanks, Jared. So if anybody has more specific questions about CIT or anything, it's time to open the floor to questions. We have some of them that are already teed up. and any comments that are submitted to the panel. And like I said, if somebody just has suggestions for us that don't require an answer right now, we're prepared to do our homework and take all of those suggestions to heart and see again how we can work better with our community. Holly, before I start with a question, could you just remind people how to submit them on our platform?
Yes, on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a control panel. You will see it says questions with a little arrow. Click on that arrow. In there, you will be able to type in your question and hit submit, and I will get them directly into all the presenters.
Okay, thanks, Holly. So we'll start with this question, which is what training is provided to officers throughout the year to prepare them for situations with aggressive or non-compliant subjects? So I guess CIT would be one of them, as Jared described. But we'll ask one of our chiefs, Chief Pesh perhaps, what would be an example of the type of training that would prepare officers for situations with aggressive or non-compliant subjects?
Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor. We have a real focus on de-escalation and CIT training here at my department and countywide. Officer Broadway does an excellent job with his CIT training. I've sent 11 officers to it in the last 2.5 years. But like he said, unfortunately, you can't always avoid the use of force. It's a nature of the beast. It's a sad reality that you're going to have to, on occasion, take people into custody while using force. We try to, and we have had a real focus on defensive tactics and learning controlled ways to bring non-compliant people into custody with no injury to the offender or the officers. And we've allocated a lot of resources and a lot of training towards that so that these officers are well-rounded. And not only are they skilled at de-escalation and crisis intervention, but in those occasions where unfortunately they do have to employ force, they have the confidence and the ability to do it, in a manner that's going to result in no injury, hopefully to themselves or the subject. And that's something that I think we need to really focus more on, as in the past, officers were only exposed to this type of training in the police academy. And we need to really allow our officers to have this training so that they are confident and they are able to successfully bring these encounters to a good conclusion.
Wow. Thanks, Chief. Chief Fine, do you have anything from the perspective of the city that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so I agree with the de-escalation training and also just the training overall with the officers. A couple associations, the Burlington County Chiefs Association is a tremendous association, works closely with the prosecutor's office regarding training, regarding the officers, making sure that in-service training is done, and also communication with the chiefs around the county. So in Burlington County, we're very lucky to have a good Chiefs Association that helps with internal affairs training on a yearly basis, and also to make sure that there's a lot of communication and cohesion around the county. Also, the State Chiefs Association also provides very good updated training for frontline supervision to make sure, and also the accreditation program with the State Chiefs Association to make sure that police departments around the state are working to the highest ethical standards to achieve accreditation. And the final is the FBI National Academy. Both myself and Director Lohman from Willingboro are involved with the executive board there with the FBI National Academy. Again, another progressive organization that is above and beyond in New Jersey to make sure, working closely with the Attorney General's office, with our prosecutor's office, to make sure that not only the frontline officers are being well trained, but also it comes down to supervision and leadership. So with those, again, exactly what Deputy Director Ziepel said is we're definitely in the forefront in police training and also in leadership here in New Jersey. That's all I have.
Officer Weiss, I want to kick this over to you. The same question about the training on dealing with aggressive or non-compliant subjects. So the chiefs obviously set policy and organize the training and give the training you have to apply it. Could you tell us how you apply this training in your job functions?
So obviously, a lot of us have went through Jared's class, which I can't even begin to explain how valuable that is to us as officers on the road, especially since most of the time we're using force. It's most of the time it's somebody that's not in the right mental frame of mind. So primarily, we need to make sure that we're ready to go hands-on if we have to. Make sure we're prepared physically to know what we're doing. Because the last thing we need is somebody that doesn't know what they're doing out there trying to go hands-on with somebody, because that just leads to a dangerous situation for everybody involved. Evesham Township, we've also outfitted all of our officers with tasers to just afford us another opportunity to help get somebody into compliance as quickly as possible. And honestly, after the taser's going off, the harm done to the person, it is very minimal once that taser's turned off. So we really, again, well, ideally in an ideal world, de-escalation is the way we go. We don't like going hands-on. None of us do. But we have opportunity to physically keep ourselves in shape, to go hands-on with people and keep our minds right with knowing how to handle people if we have to physically. And if not, we can also go to a taser or any other tool that we're provided with via our department as well. That's all I have.
I actually have a couple follow-up questions for Jared on CIT. Those questions are, how many Burlington County officers have been trained in CIT, and is CIT mandatory? Rob, you may have some insight into that as well. We'll start with Jared.
Okay. Like the prosecutor said, we've trained roughly 350 officers in Burlington County in CIT. We had our first CIT class in Burlington County in 2011. So this isn't a new program. It took a little while to gain traction, but I can tell you that the departments represented on the screen right now have absolutely bought into CIT. And you need that buy-in from the top, because if you, regardless of the training that the officers on the road have, if you don't have the buy-in from the top that are saying, okay, we're going to devote the time, we're going to devote the effort, then the program, it doesn't work. So yes, we're approaching 400 officers and we can do better. What was the second part of the question, sir?
Second part was whether CIT is mandatory, and maybe we could send that one over to Rob. I believe the Attorney General is working to expand CIT training, which, Rob, you may have some insight on.
That is correct. The Attorney General announced, I believe, in late May, early June, that we're doing a five county pilot program, including the New Jersey State Police, or 5 jurisdictions, to be CIT trained with the entire departments. CIT is a great program. It is a 5-day course. When we created the special needs de-escalation course in 2017, which is a 1-day course, we wanted to provide base level for everybody, because not everyone has taken CIT. So at the very least, everyone had a base level understanding. But the CIT is more advanced, and depending on how the pilot goes, there may be additional recommendations for all law enforcement officers to take CIT, but we first have to see how the program goes, or the pilot goes.
Okay. So next question. How do we get these messages down to patrolmen? What steps will departments take to make sure patrolmen don't violate human rights? What steps will be taken to penalize those who violate them? What policies are being initiated to make sure real change occurs? Multiple questions there in one, but we'll start with, how do we get these messages to patrolmen, and what steps will departments take to make sure patrolmen don't violate human rights? Director Lohman, could we start that one with you?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for putting on this platform, Mr. Kafina. When you talked to me about it, I was definitely on board with having these discussions with residents and constituents, and also having a panel like what you have up here, where we can take back these things and make our departments better. As far as what is done to make sure that people are in compliance with the rules and regulations that we have in place at our respective departments, it starts with accountability. I wanted to kind of piggyback on the first question about what happens when force is used. In Willingboro, when force is used, it goes through 3 levels of supervision as a review process. It's not that we don't trust our officers, it's just part of the accountability process. So when we read the reports, we watch the body cam videos, and then if it is not in compliance, it goes to our Internal Affairs Bureau, where they will take further action. So it is important that we continue to have supervision as one of the highest priorities in our agencies, and that we also support our supervisors by giving them a pathway and also giving them an opportunity to correct the behavior of their officers from the ground level, while taking into consideration the types of policies and procedures that we have at our agency levels. So Chief Fine brought up about the New Jersey Chiefs of Police and the accreditation process. Fortunately, Willingboro and Burlington City and a few other departments in Burlington County are accredited agencies. They do best practices as it relates to policies and procedures, and that has afforded us not only the opportunity of continuing that trust in that the community has for us by employing those best practices, but it also gives us as police agencies the ability to always internally look to be better. Because when that assessor comes out and they ask you, have you been doing certain things, you have to prove that you've been doing things the right way. You have to prove through reports and all the things that you have managed throughout that year process, that you are actually doing things. So I believe that accountability is one of the biggest things that we need to continue to focus on in our police agencies.
Thanks, Director. Let me ask if either of the chiefs want to add something to that, and then I'm going to drill down a little bit on these questions a little bit further, because I think to get to further what I think the questioner is really looking for.
Yeah, I'll just add the addition of our early intervention systems is really helped detect any type of patterns or conduct that might be concerning to management, and allows us to quickly rectify that or intervene before that behavior escalates. A big criticism, the prosecutor mentioned the George Floyd matter at the onset of this panel, this platform, and the officer involved in that situation, it was documented that he had 19 prior incidents or complaints. We have early intervention and early warning systems here in New Jersey that will hopefully root out those problems and resolve those issues. And if you have an officer who has issues, and he can't be rectified, then unfortunately maybe he's not fit to be a police officer. So I'm proud of the fact that we've implemented these early warning systems and early intervention systems, and they're a great asset to management and the officer themselves.
Mr. Prosecutor, if I could add to that.
Of course.
I think leadership-wise, like you said, there's something called negligent retention when it comes down to keeping problem officers, and that's what you're seeing around the country. And one thing that we have to do better in law enforcement is to make sure that we identify officers that are having these patterns of behavior and getting rid of them, and we have to do that across the country. That's just not in New Jersey, but that's across the country. So negligent retention, identifying these officers and not turning a blind eye and saying, okay, well, that's so-and-so, we'll give them more training. At some point, you're gonna have to, make some tough decisions. And in New Jersey, Burlington County, I know we refer a lot to the Burlington County Prosecutors of Attorney General's office. And New Jersey, a lot of them are addressed. Unfortunately, what we're seeing around the country is sometimes that's not the case, and it gives all law enforcement a black eye. But also, again, I'm very proud to be from Burlington County. So if it sounds like I'm talking a lot of people up, it's because I am proud to be from Burlington County. I'm proud of working for Prosecutor Kafina, but also there's a lot of new generation of police chiefs. And I want to highlight Megan Campbell from Palmyra, Chief Campbell, who's our first female chief ever in the county. So, there's a lot of new chiefs in this county that are getting on board, from Lumberton to West Hampton to here, us in Bordentown, Burlington City, and Willingboro, that are really stepping forward and trying to take the new generation, learning the great values that the leaders that just retired throughout the county, and trying to take it to the next step. So there's a lot of promise here in the county, and but we are seeing some shortcomings here in the country that we have to learn. We all have to learn from. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chief. So we had 3 chiefs just give 3 perfectly pristine answers, and we could tell why you're chiefs. Exactly what I think the questioner wanted to hear in terms of how the departments take action to make sure that when somebody does things wrong, how the oversight is done, how incidents are investigated. But it isn't just incidents; it's also demeanor. It's also the things that don't necessarily rise to the point of a complaint, but translating to sort of good public service, good interactions with the community at the officer level. So why don't I actually turn this to Officer Broadway and Officer Weiss. So how do your supervisors ensure not just that you're not, engaging in an incident that's, sort of at a higher level to get you actually in trouble, but that you're functioning in a way that's respectful of the community, that your demeanor is proper, that you're actually upholding the ideals that each of these 3 chiefs just articulated? So we can start with Officer Weiss.
So here in Evesham, we have a lot of ways that we hold ourselves accountable. We do things such as random inspections. As much of a headache as it is for guys on patrol level, the random inspections keep us in check. We have body camera, our body cameras get reviewed in a random way and generate numbers are pulled out. Our internal affairs bureau will watch it to make sure that our officers aren't acting in a way that may not necessarily get reported back to us, but they're still, being held accountable. So we do a lot with the inspection process and supervision-wise. We're lucky to have a lot of supervisors in our police department that are in touch with their shifts, where they can pick up on somebody where they might be having an attitude change, and they'll pick up on it, and we'll sit them down and try to find a game plan to figure out what's going on with this person. How can we help them? Employee assistance programs, all that kind of stuff right there that the chiefs had mentioned. But yeah, our inspections are probably will keep our demeanors in check because we always know that someone's going to be able to watch this at the end of the day, and I can't imagine how embarrassing it is to get pulled in and say you acted so out of line here for no reason. And not being able to answer it is something that I never want to have to do. So that's how we try to keep ourselves accountable in that way.
And Jared, how does the message get to the patrol officers in Burlington Township?
All right, like Evesham, Burlington Township is nationally accredited. So the Commission on Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies, we have the standards, the CALEA standards that we have to adhere to. So like Officer Weiss said, body worn camera reviews, and there's a random percentage. You never know which body worn video is going to be reviewed. It might be a barking dog complaint that you thought was going to take 30 seconds and nobody would ever hear about it again. And this gets reviewed and a demeanor complaint arises from it. Spot checks, these sergeants show up on random calls. Like there's certain calls where you expect a supervisor to show up at, but then there's some calls where you would never think a supervisor would show up and they just pop in, just not to say, aha, I got you, but just to let you know, hey, I'm here. Do you need anything? Make sure you're doing the right thing. But I guess the best way is training. And I'm currently assigned as the department training officer, training. If we say when you know better, you do better. And that's it, by giving the officers the training that they need to handle these situations. Run through the scenario before you encounter the scenario. Scenario-based training, when you deal with that difficult subject, learn how to keep your cool under pressure. And then when you're in the midst of that situation, you can respond accordingly. Lastly, dialogue. We have an open dialogue, we talk. Training officer, I go around to the different squads, we do roll call training monthly. The supervisors, they talk with the squads, we have a lot of new officers. The older officers talk to the newer officers, so there's a lot of dialogue, and nobody's afraid to say, hey, why'd you do this? Let's talk about it. Okay, how could you have done it better? And you learn from it. So everything, even when you're called on the carpet about something, might not necessarily be an issue of discipline, but let's learn from it and how can we do it better?
Thanks a lot, Jared. That was really helpful to get the perspective of not just the top, but also actually how these messages and how the oversight translates into the officers on the street. So I'm sure that was very helpful to the person who asked the question and hopefully to a lot of the other participants. Shifting to a different question, kind of a more precise one, are no-knock warrants used in Burlington County? So I could take a swing at that in the beginning and then see if any of the chiefs want to add. The answer is yes, they are used occasionally. No-knock warrants are certainly in the news right now because of the tragic incident in Louisville. The fact is that I'm not sure that everybody appreciates the degree of oversight over them. They're extremely rare, but they are used, and they're only approved by a judge who also has to approve the warrant itself. So if the officers that are executing the warrant want to use a no-knock warrant, they have to also get the judge to approve that. They're used really as a safety tool because I think as several of our panelists have said, sometimes there are people who are just not going to cooperate with the police, who are violent and who may not be willing to be arrested. And if they have the opportunity to anticipate and wait for 30 seconds after a knock on the door for the police to come in, then they may be able to set up and harm the officers. It can't be done on speculation. It's got to be done, again, based upon some articulable reason that satisfies a federal judge that the safety of the officers and the individual who's the subject of the warrant and anybody in that particular property they'd all be safer without a knock on the door before the warrant is executed for that to go forward. So they're rare, but they're a tool that does have its place in both officer safety and keeping others safe during the execution of a warrant. Anybody want to add anything to that among the chiefs? Chief Fine?
Director, did you want to go or? Okay. So Director Lohman and I were both on a tactical team. I was on a tactical team for about 10 years. And I've been involved, one as an operator going through no-knock warrants, and also as a assistant team leader. So working with the supervisory position, but also as an operator with the helmet, with the glasses on, with the raids, with the guns, so on and so forth, going through the door. So they're high tense. They are definitely stressful. Obviously, the Breonna Taylor case from Louisville definitely brought a lot of attention on no-knock warrants and why they occur. They are essential, and you have to justify beyond. You have to justify a lot in order how to get a no-knock warrant signed by a judge. But there's also things in New Jersey. There's things in Burlington County, and every no-knock warrant I've been involved in. As many times that I've been involved in, and right now we currently use the New Jersey State Police Teams Unit, and I have to say that they are some of the best trained operators in the country. I stand by the state police. I stand by the Willingboro SWAT team, and tactical teams are necessary, and they are definitely a necessary tool for law enforcement. And we are well trained in New Jersey. The biggest thing is to make sure that there's proper research prior to the warrant execution, and to make sure that there's enough to make sure that we're not hitting the wrong house. There's a over excessive amount of preparation here that I know locally. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but I can tell you if I'm working with Willingboro, with their SWAT team, which is the only tactical team in our county right now, or I'm working with the state police, there is an overabundance of caution to make sure that the right house is being hit, to the point where there's times that officers involved in the case will walk up to the door and point directly at it to make sure that it's the right house. So while we're watching what's going on in Louisville, absolutely it was a tragedy. What we do not want to see in Burlington County and in Burlington City would be something even similar to what happened to Ms. Taylor. But I could tell you every case that I've been involved with here in Burlington County, working with Willingboro, working with the prosecutor's office, and working with the state police with no-knock warrants, an overabundance of caution has been used just to make sure we prevent a tragedy. And I could tell you every case that I've been involved in has been no injury to any officer or a major injury to any suspect, or any kind of deadly use of force that I've been in my career. So again, it's a necessity, it's needed in certain instances, and there's definitely overabundance of caution to make sure we prevent tragedy here in Burlington County, in my experience.
Thanks, Chief. Director Lohman, you were about to speak on this topic as well.
Chief Fine pretty much hit everything on the head, but I just want to reiterate what he said about the over amount of preparation that goes into the execution of a search warrant. We're talking about from the moment the complaint comes in about whatever the issue may be, whether it be narcotics or illegal use of firearms or anything like that. It starts from the training that happens with your street crimes unit, with your SWAT operators, and hours and hours and hours of preparation before you even get up to the doorway. As a SWAT operator and a SWAT team leader, those are the things that we harped on before it even went to the prosecutor's office for the signatures or the approval by a prosecutor. We were training for the moment. So we have to continue to make sure that the training that we're providing our operators, the training that we're providing our detectives, the training that we're providing our prosecutors is continually put out there and put into a position where we can execute the job safely. Every SWAT job is about saving lives. It's not about running in to get product or it's about saving lives. Ultimately, that's what we're about as a police agency. When we go and do SWAT jobs, it's about saving lives. And when a tragedy occurs, like that did in Louisville, it's a black eye to the police community. And we have to continue to do our part locally to make sure that we're training, and putting people in position to be successful while keeping the community safe.
Scott, if I can just jump in here, I don't know about other states, but in New Jersey, the director did highlight something that I really want the general public to understand. It's not as if the officer goes directly before a judge himself and asks for a no-knock warrant or a search warrant. The process is that the prosecutors and the assistant prosecutors are the gateway. They need to review every search warrant at the county level or at the state level where I'm at to determine whether or not we have sufficient probable cause, whether we actually have articulated the amount of detail necessary for the right house. As well as in New Jersey since 2000, and the case law is clear on this, it's not boilerplate where you simply cut and paste the same thing for every search warrant and you get a no-knock. It has to be particular to this subject, this defendant, this target of the investigation, why they are a danger to law enforcement. And it has to be particularized to this defendant. It's important, which I think is a little different than what other states do, and again highlights what the directors and the officers are saying, the level of scrutiny that goes through every single search warrant and specifically a no-knock warrant.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Appreciate that addition. Next question, and this is one of those where at the beginning, my somewhat garbled intro due to the technology, I'd said if we're going to get from here to there, we have to be willing to talk about this. And this is not the easiest question to manage, but let's talk about it. The question is, I have always believed that some deaths of unarmed Black men relate to fear and cowardice. Some men who feel weak and less confident feel powerful with authority and a weapon, thus police brutality. How can you do better psychological evaluation before hiring? Better training won't make a weak man less fearful of minorities. So I guess the essence of the question is how we try to ensure that we have good quality officers through our hiring process and tease out some of those psychological deficiencies that may make somebody a bad officer, whether it's due to racism or feeling ineffective, cowardice, whatever it might be. Chief Pesh, could you talk about your hiring process to ensure that you have good quality ethical officers?
Absolutely. The hiring process is vital to root out those type of problem officers. Our background investigation is extensive and very thorough. We do a deep dive into every facet of the applicant's life. Social media is now a huge indicator of people's thoughts and beliefs and where they stand on issues. We examine that critically, talk to all their friends, teachers, colleagues, ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever, subject them to a psychological exam, by one of the best in the state. But ultimately, if you do hire a problem officer, if they're able to squeak by throughout all those checks and balances, once again, I revert back to accountability, early intervention, and it's a constant, scrutiny and process throughout their career to hold them accountable, for their behavior. So I think that we vet people very thoroughly here in New Jersey, particularly in Burlington County, and we have those checks and balances in place for after we hire them as well.
Director or Chief, do you want to add anything?
I would say your hiring process is only as good as your recruitment process. So, what we need to do in law enforcement is find the best people to come in, and that only starts with when you reach out to your community. Some departments have residency requirements, some departments don't, but that can't be an excuse as to why you can't go out and push to get good officers. It is shameful to have certain agencies where they don't have any type of representation of their community within their ranks. That starts, and there really is no excuse. We can say you have civil service guidelines and things like that, but it's only as good as how far you are trying to be connected with your community. If you're out there putting in the work, putting in the having people understand what policing is in your community, you're a part of the community as a police agency, people are going to want to come. I think Burlington City is one of the best examples of having a feeder process to have people that go from being, a kid from the youth police academy all the way up to a police officer in their ranks. But that comes with the hard work of actually selling your profession and showing these individuals that you are in partnership with, that you're a worthy occupation. And the question was about fear and cowardice. I don't want anybody that's fearful in my agency, that's fearful of the community that they're serving. And I believe that if you do your due diligence as a detective bureau or a hiring process, you will be able to root out that fear and cowardice before they even get to the police academy. We have to go past the point where we're kicking the can down the road and hoping that somebody else weeds somebody out. We have to be confident enough in our processes and our agencies, and be proud enough for the communities that we serve to give them the absolute best officers. And I tell my officers this all the time, in my command staff, I'd rather go without an officer than put a bad officer on our roll, because you never know when that bad officer will tarnish the whole, not only the profession, but your community. It's up to us to protect our community with hiring the absolute best people, and not just kicking the can down the road, and not just saying, oh, I need a spot. We have to do better with that.
That's a fantastic answer, Director. I'll add, at the prosecutor's office, we also do a psychological evaluation of any detectives that we hire before we make that final hiring decision. And the other thing that leads to transparency and helps us root out officers who maybe shouldn't be officers is going into the IA files from prior departments or agencies that someone else has worked with. The Attorney General's guidelines mandate now that a department has to open their files to an agency that's considering hiring one of their officers. And I actually issued a directive within the last month that all of our departments have to actually go and look into those IA files before they make a hiring decision on an officer who's been in another agency. So at one side, they have to be made available. At the hiring side, they have to be looked at, so that you really do have a sense of what that history of that officer has been. The other thing that I think is going to help on the hiring process a lot is the Attorney General's support of licensure for officers, which he's pushing forward. Rob, you may have some insight into that in terms of the time frame on it, but I think I think one of the things the Attorney General has said is hairdressers need a license, doctors need a license. There's no reason why police officers shouldn't need a license. And I think it's a very good way to ensure that someone who an agency is considering hiring at least meets that minimum standard and hasn't created the amount of trouble that would cause their license to be pulled. Rob, anything on that?
Yeah, that is correct, Scott. The Police Training Commission oversees police training at the academy level for all academies other than the state police. Earlier this summer, in June this summer, the Attorney General voted, and it was a unanimous vote among the Police Training Commission in favor of moving New Jersey towards a license for law enforcement officers. And part of my shop and part of what we're doing now is actually seeing how that would work with recommendations by the Police Training Commission to the Attorney General as to how that would work. That's extremely important. I will tell you, I started my comments by indicating that on training side, we've been well in front of the nation. On the licensure side, we're one of a handful of states that doesn't have some sort of police license. And so with the Attorney General actually taking the lead on that, and with the county prosecutors taking the lead on that as well, this will be the first time once implemented that we would have a licensure for New Jersey officers.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I'm going to go to the next question. I think we might be able to aim to the officers to start with. Understandably, police officers develop a very close bond with each other. However, that can be problematic when a problem officer is protected by other officers and police unions. What is in the works to protect police officers that want to report misconduct by other officers? What training is in place to teach police officers to intervene when another officer is acting with excessive force? So why don't we start at the patrol level with Officer Broadway for this one.
All right, the old adage, am I my brother's keeper? And we need a culture in law enforcement that, yes, you are absolutely your brother's keeper. And you have a duty and an obligation, if not legally, which I believe they're working on in New Jersey, then morally and ethically to be your brother's keeper. And when you see that officer doing something wrong, to stop them. And that's what didn't happen in Minneapolis. That's why I think that incident got so much attention, because everybody saw it and they watched it happen and nobody did anything. So we have to create a culture where officers know, hey, if I see something going down that's not right, I need to intervene and I need to put a stop to it. And it goes both ways, just from the day they come out of the academy through retirement day, just by having that in place, having the policies in place, having the necessary training in place, and that mindset that, yes, we're all in this together. We have each other's backs, but we need to do the right thing when nobody's watching. And that's what integrity is. So just by instilling that integrity amongst the officers, I think that's how you handle that issue.
Josh.
It comes back again to, we keep echoing accountability. We need to hold ourselves accountable as officers, especially within platoons and departments as a whole. We need to make sure that your partner's not out there violating somebody's rights. I think it comes down to morality as well. Jared said it perfectly, you know. I'm not sure how you can go home at night knowing that you let somebody else perform an action on somebody that's not right, not legal, whatever you want to call it. And it's tough with these close bonds of police departments and police officers together. Try spending more time with your officers and your family. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that the people that you signed up to protect are protected. I take great pride. I grew up with an older brother. When one of us stepped out of line, the other one corrected the behavior. Whether it turned into a wrestling match in our living room or not, that's how you learn good morality and good moral compass, by keeping each other accountable enough.
Thanks, Officer Weiss. Got a couple questions. One related to whether officers are tested for PTSD over the course of their career. Another one that says, concerning mental health, do officers undergo regular psychological evaluations? What counseling or assistance is available? This touches on a couple things, one of which is resiliency that Rob mentioned during his remarks. Resiliency program is really something that New Jersey's been one of the leaders of, and we're proud to say Burlington County's been one of the leaders in New Jersey of. And it's aimed at giving officers really the tools, almost an inoculation against the stress of the job. And it's not just the stress of the incidents that they see that would put anybody sort of on their heels, the types of things that most people don't see, unfortunately don't have to. But it's also the stress of being constantly on call, constantly vigilant for their safety. Always having to operate at that high level of performance and protection. That adds stress in and of itself, even if it's a shift without any incident. I've been on ride-alongs with officers where I've seen them walk up to a car, not knowing who was in there, and just, again, sitting in my seat in the front seat and just watching them do it. And it's the most routine car stop, yet an incredible act of bravery to walk up to a car at night, not knowing who's in there, what their day's been like, and what might be going on in the person's mind. And that puts stress on the officer. But so resiliency has been a huge tool in terms of helping police officers themselves, and that's its primary purpose. But there's a huge community benefit to that, because when police officers have this kind of help and they're having a better day, then they're having better interactions with the community. And that's one of the things is the people who are working in our office on resiliency talked to me about it, and it was sort of the more subtle part of it, but so important. We do so much to make sure that our officers are in prime physical shape, and that also helps in terms of their interactions and keeping them safe and the community safe. But their mental health is also so important to keeping the community safe. So resiliency, as Rob mentioned, is now, it's mandatory statewide. It's going to be rolled out over the next year. It might be 2 years by the time because of COVID, but there's been a lot of training that's already been done. There have been resiliency officers designated in every department already. So we're really down the road on that. So that's one element to it. And a couple of you have also mentioned the early warning system in terms of flagging these psychological issues that might be materializing that could cause a problem with an officer. If one of the chiefs want to talk about their early warning system and how it works, I think that might be helpful as well. Chief Fine, do you want to?
Sure. So first is one is I teach at the police. I teach at several police academies around the state, and I actually teach critical incidents, how to survive a deadly use of force encounter, and how to live beyond it. And what you could describe a deadly force encounter or any kind of critical incident that we describe it as is that that was the battle. And what I describe to the officers is that if you're involved in a use of deadly force, is to win, to win the battle. I don't expect officers to be punched. I don't expect my officers to be kicked, spit at, shot at, or stabbed. If they have to protect themselves, I fully encourage my officers to protect themselves within lawful reason. But I do not expect any of my officers to be hurt in fear of any kind of repercussions within the agency or publicly. So, but everybody wants to go home safely, and I tell the officers to make sure that we not only check our physical health but also our mental health. So that's the first thing. But as we go into the early warning system, if you wind up seeing, we track the officers' incidents of use of force. Are they higher than the average officer within the agency or in the area? Now, there may be officers that have higher use of force incidents compared to other officers, and there's several reasons for that. I have officers sometimes assigned to a high crime area or a proactive detail where they're going after some of the most violent individuals in our community. Those individual officers may have a higher chance of having to use force because of the individuals who they're going after at my direction. So I know that if there's a higher level of use of force incidents, one is not just to judge solely on that number, but also look at their assignment and what are they assigned to do. So that's one of the top things. But you also want to make sure, and the gentleman from one of the last questions were right. Makes a good point. Has there been racism in policing? The answer is yes. Has there been officers, what we described as picked on in high school, and now they're going to get a badge to get everybody back? The answer is yes. In teaching in the police academies, you have to make sure that these recruits that are coming out of the police academy to say, yes, that is a fact. Yes, that has happened. And now the problem is there, but the new leadership, the new prosecutor here in this county, working closely with our surrounding agencies of Burlington Township, Burlington City, we are part of the solution. So with the early warning system, we want to see the incidents. We want to make sure that, you know, is this officer charging a bunch of people and all these charges are being dismissed? Are these charges going up to the prosecutor's office? Is there a Fourth Amendment illegal search issue that we have to start looking at? So there's not only just the use of force incidents. Let's look at the incidents of discipline. Let's look at the incidents of demeanor complaints. Let's look at all these things combined to look to see if this is a well-rounded officer, if this officer is just assigned to a high crime area where they're doing their job effectively, or is this officer needed better training, or do they need discipline, or do we just have to start the process of potentially removing that person because they are not protecting the community of which they were sworn to serve. So there's so many options, there's so many reasons and so many things to look at. There's just not one sole thing. I know NJ.com put a really good article out a few years back, was the force report, and they put officers numbers of how many times they used force and how much times, so on and so forth. While those numbers are good, that's only a piece of the puzzle. That's only the piece of the puzzle. You got to look at the entire puzzle. You got to look at it well-rounded and the entire concept before you start passing judgment on all the other officers around the state.
And that's actually a good segue to remind our participants that about the Attorney General's use of force comment portal on the Attorney General's webpage. It's front and center if you go to nj.gov/OAG. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the Attorney General is in the process of updating the statewide use of force policy for the first time since 2000. So he's really eliciting the comments from as many of the public that want to offer them. I encourage anyone that has some insight into that to offer their comments on that portal, the Attorney General's website. Next question, also sticking with use of force, is please speak to the investigative process into instances of use of force. Who decides when force is used appropriately in retrospect, and who audits these investigations? I'll start for a second on an overview. Ultimately, if it's a fatal use of force, then it's the Attorney General's office who oversees that, and I'll kick that to Rob for that process. That's pursuant to a new law that was enacted a year ago. But generally, use of force is investigated within an individual department and then overseen by the prosecutor's office. If it's a use of deadly force where the individual doesn't die, then it's the prosecutor's office who's investigating it from the outset. But if, well, why don't I just start with Rob then, because the fatal use of forces are the ones that are obviously the most concerning and get the most attention. And if you would, because I know we have a very robust process of oversight for investigating fatal use of force by officers, if you share a little bit about that.
Sure, and this was by statute, Scott. The statute was amended that required the Attorney General's office, and specifically an office within the Office of the Attorney General, OPIA, the Office of Professional Integrity and Accountability Unit, to investigate all deadly force scenarios. So whether that is a county officer or a state police officer or a municipal officer, which was different in the process, now that immediately is investigated by the Office of the Attorney General through OPIA for determination and review. That review is robust. Those investigations are robust, and there is a long process to determine whether or not the use of force, deadly force, in that situation was justified. There's also one other area in which the Office of the Attorney General reviews use of force options, and that is when a taser or a CED is deployed. That is a robust process as well. That is reviewed by the chief of the municipality, then the county prosecutor, and then it is actually sent to me at the Office of the Attorney General. And each process along the layer does an independent review to determine whether or not the use of the taser was within the Attorney General's use of force policy on CEDs.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I didn't know if any of the chiefs wanted to talk about their own internal review of use of force. Chief Pesh?
I'm just gonna, reiterate what Director Lamone said earlier. On if it doesn't involve a fatal use of force, if it's your traditional, day in, day out, there's multi levels of review. All the agencies on this panel, I believe, follow the same processes, and that is any officer who employs a force during his or her duties has to fill out a form, has to report it. It's going to get reviewed by their immediate supervisor. Then it's going to go up to the command level review. Videos are going to be scrutinized just to ensure that it was within policy and procedure. If there's anything absent that, it's going to get reported to internal affairs. If it rises to the level of criminality, it'll get reported to the prosecutor's office.
Okay, I'm going to get to the next question. If someone feels mistreated by the police, how would you ever hear their story? The last people they're likely to complain are the police, since they would likely fear further mistreatment or retaliation. So what safe avenues are there for people to voice their complaints anonymously if necessary? So I'll ask the chiefs to talk about how one would make a complaint in each of your departments. I'll say that by Attorney General directive, each department is required to have on their website visible to the public a means and a process for how they can raise complaints directly. Complaints can be raised anonymously. The challenge to that is that the less information that's provided, including the name of the individual making the complaint, it just could impede the ability to effectively investigate that complaint. But every complaint does get investigated. And so they can be done anonymously. As far as retaliation is concerned, you would certainly hope that that wouldn't happen. If it would happen, I would think that would be yet another issue of discipline on top of whatever the underlying issue might be. So I guess I'll kick it to the chiefs. Are you open to these complaints about officers, and should people have any hesitation in raising them through your website, through your portal, or however whatever means you want for them to raise a complaint? I'll start with Director Lohman this time.
Thank you, Prosecutor Kafina. I would say we encourage our residents and the people that we encounter that if they feel like they were mistreated, that they do report it to us. Our supervisory staff isn't omnipresent. We're not there all the time. We have a level of trust that we put into our officers. However, if an officer violates that trust, it is up to us to put the wheels in motion to have accountability. I think we've been talking about accountability and training and culture throughout this whole segment, but it is important that our residents and the people that we encounter believe that when they do complain that it is investigated. And I can speak on behalf of the Willingboro Police Department that every officer is a potential taker of a complaint. If you're on the street and you believe that, officer from 2 or 3 shifts ago violated you or did something inappropriate, you can report it to another officer, and then that officer is required to fill out a complaint form and then push it up through the chain of command. If you want to be anonymous, that's fine also. But I just want to reiterate that when you complain about something, or if there's an injustice that's done to you, if you don't say anything about it, we can't do anything about it. So we encourage in Willingboro, we encourage our people to tell us when we're doing it wrong or someone did it wrong. And I will tell you, as long as I'm at the helm, we're gonna do it the right way.
Scott, if I could, the new Attorney General Directive 2019-5 also strengthens the reporting process. So, for example, it now requires the civilian complaint form to be made available in multiple languages in all departments and offices via website. It clarifies that agencies must accept complaints from undocumented immigrants and should establish the receipt of complaints by telephone or email. Officers are prohibited from affirmatively warning complainants that they may face consequences for filing a false report. That can't happen pursuant to the new directive. Alleged violations of the directive issued by the AG or county prosecutor will be handled by the internal affairs process. So the new policy directive 2019-5 tightened up the reporting process as well and reaffirms everything that the chiefs have discussed.
Yeah, and on a more informal basis as well. I mean, if somebody's not satisfied with the outcome of a complaint, how it was investigated at a local department, that's what the prosecutor's office is there for. And I've given my number before. I'll give it again right now, 609-265-5034. That's my number. And if someone's not satisfied with how a complaint was handled, they can call me. And if they're not satisfied with how our office handles it, they can go to the Attorney General's office. And that happens. We hear from the Attorney General following up on matters that we've investigated to when somebody's not been satisfied and wants further explanation about it. And we take another look when it's warranted. Everybody wants to get this right. And nobody wants, we don't want people to be out in the community frustrated, feeling that they've been mistreated by an officer, and have an officer who may have actually mistreated somebody out there not being addressed and potentially mistreating somebody else. Nobody benefits from it. We have, like I said, I think we have more than 50 officers on this particular call right now joining with us. They're all here because they want to hear the community's concerns and because they want to get it right and they want to do it right. You know, the days of covering up for an officer are over. And it's not practical. It's not going to allow officers to do their job and protect the community effectively, and it's not what anybody wants. So I'll get to another question. This is a very simple one. We'll ask the three chiefs, how do you fire a bad cop? Very simple, right? Chief Fine.
Chief Best, you want to go first?
See you leaning in.
All right, so so to try, how do you fire a bad cop? Now there's several ways to address it, and in Burlington City, and I can't speak for other towns, but I could put my full support in pretty much every police department in the county. Like I said, I work closely with Willingboro and Burlington Township, kick a lot of ideas, Bordentown Township, and Evesham, kick a lot of ideas around with their administrations. But say if there's an egregious situation that happens, a really bad use of force incident that occurred that, you know, bottom line is if you wear a Burlington City Police uniform, I stand behind you. If you're not wearing the uniform for the right reasons, you won't be in a Burlington City Police uniform. And I know that's the same way with Lieutenant Sullivan's out in the township. Again, very dedicated to their craft out in Burlington Township, Director Painter as well. So again, I work closely with them, Willingboro. But if say there's an egregious scenario use of force, we would immediately notify our Burlington County Prosecutor's Office. But you have to look at it as there's a criminal element and then there's an administrative element. So the criminal element will be handled by the Prosecutor's Office, the Attorney General's Office if it's a deadly use of force. But the administrative part of it is where a lot of the questions come. So in the event that you can't immediately fire somebody, especially under civil service, again, police officers do have right of due process. So you may see the officer, what you would describe as placed on administrative leave or suspended with pay. With that said, is that you actually have to formally charge that officer under what it would be called Title 4A. That's the state code for administrative code, Title 4A, where you would charge the officer under state statute, but also your policy. So you would suspend that officer and then do the due process through administratively. It will kind of run concurrent and with the criminal investigation. So while that officer may be, if that officer is indicted, you would still suspend that officer. However, you would still have to go through a judicial process through the administrative Office of Administrative Law through the state in order to fire a police officer. Many times what you would see is a police officer will resign prior to those charges. But I have been involved with cases such as this, but I can tell you now that the process is a lot more put together, a lot more complex than what it would be the common eye. Now, a lot of people ask, why is this not public record? Again, the officer charged, again, has a right to due process. And also, this is still an internal affairs process, which again is still not public record. The officer again does have privacy rights. A lot of these things are confidential in nature to protect not only the integrity of the investigation, but also the case in itself. So it's a lot. It's very complex. I kind of just scratched the surface, but I can tell you that if there's an egregious case like that, there's going to be immediate suspension, many times with pay or without pay, and then there's something called a hearing in order to keep that officer out of work. So that's just scratching the surface, but a lot more tricky than what meets the common eye.
Chief Pesh?
Yeah, just to add to that, even in, not the most egregious circumstances, but you just have a problem officer per se, you have to use progressive discipline, and that starts from the top. You have to have strong leadership that's going to hold people accountable, that's going to, document when there's misconduct, and you're going to use that eventually if the officer isn't receptive to training or discipline. Eventually, you're going to use all those documented instances to terminate him or her. And, but it's got to come from the top. You have to hold people accountable. They have to know that they're going to be held accountable. You have to take action when you encounter wrongdoing. And that's how you get rid of a problem officer.
We're approaching the end of our time here, but we have a couple of questions that I think really get to what we were trying to, the heart of what we're trying to discuss here today. So I'll kick these around as well. So this is I think a very important question. It seems to me that African-American, specifically African-American men, are afraid of the police, and on the other side, police officers seem to be afraid of African-American men. Now you have an intense situation where both parties are afraid of each other. What efforts are underway or are planned to cross this often racial divide? I'm going to start with the patrol officers on this one because, again, you have the most direct and common interaction with people from the public. Officer Weiss, we'll start with you.
So I think that the best way that we can, eliminate these fears in the community is, first of all, bridge the gap with the community to the police department itself and our efforts in community policing. And getting out into our communities and meeting our communities. I think it's something that's ignored in our bigger cities throughout the country. It's something that's not really ignored in Burlington County, thankfully. It's getting out to know the members of our communities, because the last thing we need is somebody that's so out of touch with the place that they police that they make the dumbest action possible when they're actually out there. So getting out there in community policing events, we have a community policing unit within our jurisdiction, where we're out at schools getting to know parents, the students, to gain that trust, because it's what it all comes back to, is trust within each other. We're all human beings at the end of the day. I mean, like, you got to learn to trust each other. So again, getting out in the communities, bridging these gaps. It's amazing we're having this conversation in 2020, but we need to bridge these gaps because it's unacceptable that we have to keep having these conversations. So get out in your communities, talk to people, earn each other's trust. It's a big thing to think of. Jared can echo that or add to that.
Okay, I can actually order a slightly different perspective because of who I am and how I look. So being a Black male, I know that society views me differently, and I'm no more of a threat than anybody else, but I know that when I walk into certain places, if I'm not wearing a uniform, if I'm wearing a uniform, I get a pass, and then I'm accepted. But if I walk into a local retail establishment at a certain hour, I'm looked at more closely than other people. And as a Black man in America, as the father of a Black son, as I have Black brothers, I have Black nephews, these are things that we've grown up with, conversations that we have to have that other people don't. So from a young age, we have to say, hey, if you get stopped by the police, I tell my son, he's 23. I'm a cop. He's never been in trouble, but he knows if I get stopped by the police, hey, be respectful. Keep your hands where they can see you. And talk, listen to them. If you think that you were unjustly singled out, there's a process, but trying to litigate that stop on the side of the road is going to end poorly, and it's typically going to end poorly for us. So I mean, we don't have time to get into it, but those are the implicit biases. Historically, the Black man in America has been portrayed as a threat. And you see the videos and they're like, the Black man is the robber, he's the mugger, he's the rapist. And unfortunately, if you've had no dealings outside of what you've seen in the media, you might really believe that. And like Prosecutor Kafina said in the beginning, it can be an unconscious bias. So you don't specifically walk out of your house saying, I think all Black people are bad, but just by a lifetime of what you've seen, that might be what you think. Establish a rapport. I say, even if it's something simple, standing outside the Wawa and an unofficial conversation. Hey, how you doing? And you might get a strange look at first, but continue it. Barbershops, liquor stores, wherever people congregate, if you can show them that you're a human, something out, get out of the car, walk up to somebody, shake somebody's hand, not in the COVID era, but when we emerge from it, to show them, hey, I'm a man, you're a man, we're all humans, and you kind of let that guard down and become approachable. Let them know this is who I am, I'll treat you fairly, but that's where it starts. I don't want to take up all the time, but yes, my view is absolutely different than a lot of other views, but it starts with a conversation.
Really appreciate your candor with that, Jared. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that former Attorney General John Hoffman used to say was you don't want to actually be meeting each other for the first time in a crisis. And the interaction that you guys have both described is very important in terms of having that relationship at a time like where we're at now, where tensions are high. And the outreach is so important that you're not just meeting the members of your community for the first time when a protest is being planned. Director Lohman, in terms of the moment that we're in now, what steps, if any, have you taken with your department to ease the tensions between the department and the communities that you're serving?
What we've been doing is doing what we've always been doing. We pretty much have let our community know that we're a part of the community also. I think where a lot of agencies get into trouble is that they don't actually see themselves as part of the community. When we go out there and engage on an everyday basis, when, like Jared said, getting out of the car, talking to the residents, engaging with the children, engaging with people out, you know, when they're just not on their on a car stop or what have you. Those are the things that we need to continue to do. And also, each officer needs to look at themselves as a community engagement officer. You know, we can't just chime it off to one unit or one person to do all the engagement for your agency. Each person needs to look at it and say, hey, what can I be doing to let our community know that we're doing or we're part of you? One of the things that we've also done as an agency, we put out a community survey. It just closed on Monday, July 13th. What we've been saying from day one is we can think that we're the best police department in the United States, but if our residents and the people that interact with us don't feel the same way, then we're missing something. So, you know, we're going to take the data that we get from there, get from those surveys, and we're going to make substantial gains when it comes to building upon what we already have. But we were only going to be able to know that, you know, what we need to improve upon if we give the community a voice, and actually a substantial voice where it's not just tongue in cheek and people just believe that we're doing certain things because of the moment. We have to make sure that we're doing things for the right reason, at the right time, and in the right way. And I think that if we continue to put that out there to our community and to our internally to our officers, that we'll be able to continue to maintain the bonds between the police and the community. But it's going to take some work from all ends. It can't just be about the police doing work, but it also has to be about the community wanting to get involved and wanting to make a substantial change in the right way.
Thanks, Director. I'm going to steal back a little bit of time because we got the late start, so we'll continue just with this question. I want to give Chief Pesh and Chief Fine a chance to weigh in, and then I'm just going to have one more question when that's done. So, Chief Pesh?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I couldn't agree more with the points made about, being hyper-focused on community policing. That's a great way to break down those barriers and those fears. That's something our department has done since, I took over. And it's not just a box you check. We have National Night Out once a year. It's got to be a day in and day out philosophical approach where each and every one of your officers buys in and is out there being community guardians. And the only other thing I want to add is, fear is rooted in ignorance. And, we were lucky enough to host the Philadelphia chapter of the Anti-Defamation League. And they instructed implicit bias to my whole department. And we were able to examine those stereotypes and those assumptions that we as individuals often hold, but more importantly, that the community may hold and citizens, so that we can't fall victim, the police, of people who want to weaponize the 911 system and call us and report a minority who's maybe walking in their neighborhood. My officers are trained on how to recognize that, and they're gonna want more, and they're gonna need more, and elicit more from the caller, so that we're not walking ourselves into an awkward or tense encounter with someone and losing their distrust. We're going to recognize that beforehand. So that's so important. I commend you, Mr. Prosecutor, on your intent to bring that training to the county at large. And I think that's going to help break down those barriers and keep trust amongst the police in our communities.
Chief Fine.
So I was very lucky to inherit a department that community policing was already in our culture. I definitely worked hard to enhance it. A few things. One is our police chaplain program. I know the Burlington County Police Chaplain Association with Evesham Township and has worked very well. We have the Riverfront Police Chaplain program that goes from Florence to Delanco to work closely. So our police chaplains throughout the county have done Eric Jarvis is one chaplain that stands out. Veronica Pollard from our police chaplain program. Two police chaplains, probably two of the best in the county that we know of out in this area. So police chaplains are definitely one. Two is just like you said, make sure your young officers are on the street knowing who is who. Make sure they know who the elders are in the neighborhood. In Burlington City, we've worked very closely with Burlington County Sheriff Tony Basanis. With this whole COVID thing, we're handing out 200 meals a day to kids. We're almost doing 1,000 meals. We're these children and throughout several areas of our town. 60% of children in Burlington City are free or reduced eligible for lunches and breakfast through the school program. So with 1,000 meals a week, that's 1,000 interactions between children and police officers in a positive light from Burlington City and the Burlington County Sheriff's Department. We've also teamed up with the Willingboro Township Police Department, the NAACP, and also a few other partners to do a drive-through food pantry, where also our young officers, Willingboro officers, are able to drop off food to elderly and disabled residents, many of whom who also have children living in the house. Again, a positive interaction where a police car is pulling up, dropping off food to residents that will need this food, and also, again, a positive interaction. So create that positive interaction and continue to move forward with that. And lastly is education, but also get involved in civic groups. You have two very good NAHCP chapters with the Southern Burlington County and the Willingboro Vicinage. Please join civic groups and educate yourself. And also, again, and I said it before, be part of the solution and don't continue to be part of the problem or ignore the problem. Please be part of the solution. Work with everybody sitting here on this board, and let's continue to move forward. I'm very optimistic for this area.
Thanks, Chief. So I'll ask just one last question. It's one that I think we as leaders of our agencies hear periodically. I think it's probably as topical now as it's ever been, which is, what are the proactive steps that you're taking to increase the diversity of your agency? Chief, or Director Lohman, you touched on this a little bit before. I'll just start with you if you want to finish your thought on that, and then we'll go around again.
I think with diversity, we have to make it a priority. I think people look at Willingboro Township and say, hey, they have a lot of, we have, I believe, 7 female officers. We have minority representation. We're up to close to 37%. But it still doesn't necessarily reflect the demographic of our community. I think that the only department that pretty much reflects their community with diversity wise. I believe it's East Orange, or I think they're upward of 80 to 85% diverse. But we have to make sure that we're appealing to people from a broad spectrum. It can't just be because my dad was a cop, now I'm looking to get another person to be a cop. You got to look at your community. You know, I came from a background that wasn't necessarily, I didn't just look to be a police officer. I had a college background. I was looking to get into engineering and things like that, but I went through a different track. And we have to make sure that we try to appeal to all walks of life, because that's the only way that our profession is going to be able to survive. We can't just be a straight line. We have to have people that represent different parts of our community. You know, we have to have people that look and you know, that want to be interactive, that want to serve. And we can't just look at them and say, all right, you're the traditional looking police officer. That's I want you. You're 6 feet tall, you're in shape, you know, you went to the military. No, we have people who are dying to want to give back to their community, and we have to go out and start from before the civil service test is out. We have to start recruiting before we get to that point where we're telling people, how do you apply for a test? What do you have to do? How are you preparing yourself to be the best candidate? You know, and then the little things that people have done throughout, you know, in my 20-year law enforcement career, I know that there have been times where people have missed out on good candidates because we were doing things like, all right, you didn't come in with blue pen instead of, and you're supposed to be writing in black pen. All right, now, you know, that just shows me that you can't follow instructions. You're not ready to go to police academy. We need to do better with identifying who potential candidates are and internally saying, all right, we want the best. And sometimes your pathway may not just be as straight and rigid as the people before us, but we also are looking to help people be the best candidate that they can through mentorship, through recruitment, through involvement, and actually showing yourself that you are a police agency worthy of their time and worthy of their you want them to be part of you. So you have to be excited about that, and you have to do better than your predecessors. You know, I challenge our, you know, the guys in Burlington County to do, and if you need to reach me, you know how to reach me. You know, I don't have the exact answer, but I do have answers in how we could do better with diversity in Burlington County. And we have to. That's the only thing that people are going to accept. We can't just say you're going to have the white police officer and the black subject. We have to have people that look like us in key positions, and you also have to promote people, you know. So we got a lot of work to do, but I think that we're on the right pathway by having these conversations. These are tough conversations to have, you know, but they're important. And just because we have a perspective, you know, your perspective may be different than mine, but we all want the same common thing. We want to be able to serve our residents in a way in which we're showing integrity, honor, and commitment. And I think that we have to be passionate about it.
Thanks, Director. That's another fantastic answer. And you know, from the prosecutor's office perspective, we also always try to increase the diversity of our detectives and our assistant prosecutors. And it's a challenge, but it's one that we take on. And I think one of the things you touched upon is making your agency attractive as somewhere where a good candidate can succeed, someone who wants to work hard, who does great work, will be supported by their colleagues, will have opportunities for advancement. If they do it right, then their career is going to flourish. And that's one thing, is to make your agency attractive to somebody to come to, because you're competing with other agencies for other people who want to be in law enforcement. Another thing that we do that I think is very important is establishing a pipeline, whether it's into the high schools even, whether it's into colleges, RCBC and Rowan, attending their job fairs and getting to know people before they're necessarily ready to be an officer or begin on their career and they're still doing their education. But to present, whether it's the prosecutor's office or a police department, as a career option for them is something that would be attractive. And we've also worked very hard to develop a relationship with the minority student program at Rutgers Law School to try to bring newly graduated or law graduates who are just finishing a clerkship into our office as new assistant attorneys and increase our diversity in that way. And part of it is the same things that everybody's touched upon tonight: being present in the community, being a member of the community, not being apart from it. And again, holding your agency out as a place that people would want to come and work at, because it seems like a good place to work for people who want to work hard and do good for their community. Chief Fine?
One thing that's worked for us, and I was a police explorer, doing ride-alongs at 17 years old here in Burlington City, but also our reserve unit for Class 1s and Class 2s have been a very good pipeline to socialize and also help groom the next generation. Our entire command staff started in the reserve unit, but in addition to diversity, you also want to make sure that you're hiring the right candidate that's in it for the right reasons, and to make sure that they're going to devote themselves. When you're hiring an officer, now that they have to do 30 years, you have to look at it like you're making a 30-year commitment into your community. And if that commitment is not 100%, then you're actually doing a disservice to that community. So by having a good, solid reserve unit, you're able to help socialize, you're able to help bring in the next generation of police officers. This has helped us. Pretty much out of the last 13 officers, I would say 9 of them came through our reserve unit. We're able to have one African-American officer of our first officer with Haitian descent, and we were able to hire our first Muslim officer with Turkish descent through our reserve unit, through recruiting. Again, we are tied with civil service on regarding who we can hire through our civil service list. However, by recruiting and doing that through our reserve unit, helped us groom the next generation of police officers, and we have been more diverse now in Burlington City than we ever have been. So our reserve unit has been very successful, and again, our department has been more diverse now than it has been, I would say, ever before. So in addition to RCBC, I just completed my first semester as an adjunct professor at RCBC, teaching criminal investigations. And again, I've also reached out to some of the students to see if law enforcement would be for them. So recruitment wise, please, again, if you're out there, if anybody, a New Jersey resident, you're able to apply, start part-time here with us. It helps us to figure out who you are and what expectations that you would have long-term, but also helps that candidate to see if law enforcement's for them. But again, it's been a very successful program here in Burlington City. And I agree with Director Lohman. We have to do better here in Burlington County. But again, with the new generation of chiefs coming in, leadership being taught by some of the best around, again, we have a very positive outlook here in Burlington County.
Chief Pesh, you want the last word on this?
Sure. I couldn't agree more that diversity is very important in our hiring practices currently, and I'm happy to say that that's something that I've had a real focus on since I took over 3 years ago, and we've had diversified our ranks with our recent hires. And it goes back to being present in your community, building trust and legitimacy in your community so that the job is appealing to your community members. The way you promote yourself on social media is huge. That's something that we've really undertaken and put a focus on. Not only the good things our officers do in the community, but some of the programs that we offer. We have a huge health and wellness program. We take care of our employees, and that's going to make that an appealing factor for hopefully a new hire. Ride along program is something that we're implementing so we could kind of take the shroud of secrecy away from policing and bring people in and show them what we do on a daily basis, and just being good guardians in our community and making the job something that people desire to do. With a mentoring program in our high school, connecting with our youth so they can see us in a different light and want to be part of this great profession. And it's something that we're definitely going to build on, and it's an important focus for all of us. And we look forward to welcoming people from all different backgrounds into this honorable profession.
Thanks, Chief. Well, this has been just an incredibly constructive conversation, especially given the limitations that we're operating under, having to do this with, questions being basically emailed in or tagged in. Obviously, the technological challenges at the front end of this presentation, but everybody's here for the Q&A anyway, and I think it's been really meaningful. I know, Jared, we got a comment complimentary of your very candid and honest discussion of what it's like to be an African-American police officer. So this is at the heart of what needs to be brought over and over to light. Thank you, P.O. Broadway, for sharing your story. This is exactly what I'd hoped for in terms of a conversation with the community. We have we had 300 people participate tonight, which is just exceeded my expectations. The technology did not meet the expectations, but we're going to do this again. We have so many questions that we weren't even able to get to, and we're either going to do it on a better technological platform, or we're going to meet in a park with masks, and we're going to be able to actually talk about this. Because the face-to-face dialogue is so much better than talking at people, even though that's where we're at right now with COVID. But I really can't thank enough all of our panelists for participating tonight, and for your very genuine answers and responses to some questions that were not always the easiest ones to manage. I really want to thank the participants and the police officers and chiefs that were part of the participants. I said at the outset how what a great idea that my friend Marcus had to have patrol officers be part of this conversation so that they could hear these questions from the community directly. I think it was very valuable to have them there, and really appreciate that they were able to log in, and that so many of them did. As Holly mentioned, this has been recorded. We're gonna post it on our website and Facebook page, and it'll be on the page of the departments that participated tonight. And one last thing from me, and then I'll see if anybody else has any final thoughts. I think I speak for all of the chiefs, not just on this panel, but across the county, that we're willing to talk to anybody in smaller settings or groups who want to discuss law enforcement issues in their municipalities. It doesn't have to be a formal program for us to sit down and have a conversation, pick up a phone and have a conversation, and get to the heart of whatever is on people's minds. Chief Fine talked about, and Chief Pesh talked about, the great sort of newer generation of chiefs that are just coming into their own in our county right now. We have a number of newer chiefs, and they're all open to hearing from the community. Everybody has a genuine interest in serving their community well. So I urge the people who are on this call to reach out to us if you have issues. It doesn't have to be a formal meeting. With that, I'll just see if any of our panelists have anything else they'd like to offer before we sign off for the evening, and a commitment again to do something like this again and soon, because we got so many questions and thoughts that we weren't even able to get to tonight. Chief Fine?
Yeah, first I just want to say thank you, but I also want to highlight Officer Broadway, who's probably one of the most humble instructors and officers with CIT. Not only was I on the tactical team with Officer Broadway, but he's also a certified paramedic. So with the whole COVID stuff and everything going on from the pandemic onto what you're dealing with on the street, I just want to say thank you also on behalf of our agency and law enforcement for your efforts, not only as a police officer but also as a paramedic. You represent Burlington Township well. I know you're very humble and you're very low key when it comes down to it, but I just want to say thank you. You're definitely one of the best cops, and we're proud to have our officers follow your lead. So, and for the rest of the panelists, again, thank you so much. But again, Officer Broadway, thank you.
Thanks, Chief Fine. I will say just my parting words for the officers listening: do better. We can always do better. And for the people listening, let the process play out before you rush to judgment and get the pitchforks out. Get the facts, gather the facts, make sure that you're informed before you start spewing things that might not necessarily be true. So there is a process, let the process work, and continue the dialogue. So thanks for having me. Proud to be a part of this panel, and I will see you guys the next time.
I don't think any of us can top that. So I'll just end it with good night, stay safe, and everybody stay healthy. Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.
See you guys.